Welcome to Biztecha's Women in Leadership show. Now, in conjunction with International Women's Day 2023, we bring you a Women in Leadership series where we connect you with some of the most successful female leaders in the Asia-Pacific region to uncover the tenacity that each woman leader, as they have pushed boundaries and risen to the top of their respective fields. Our guest for today is from Malaysia, and she is a very well-known figure in healthcare. With an illustrious career spanning over 3 decades, Professor Dr. Adeeba Kamaruzaman has been the driving force behind mitigating the spread of infectious diseases such as HIV/AIDS, and has been instrumental in structuring policies and responses that led to the prevention, treatment and reduction of HIV cases in Malaysia. Now, Professor Adeeba is also the Professor of Medicine and Infectious Diseases at the University of Malaya. Now, with all of that, welcome back to the Biztechasia, Professor Adeeba.
Thank you so much, Brian, for having me again.
Now, before we begin, could you share with our audience the work that you do globally, and but starting, of course, with your current role in University of Malaya?
Okay, this is going back a while now. So I trained and started off as a clinician, looking at management of people with infectious diseases broadly. So conditions such as dengue, hospital-acquired infections, tuberculosis, and of course, HIV. So when I first started work at University Hospital, as it's more widely known, PPUM, back in the mid-90s. So yes, it's going back a long time now. In fact, the field of infectious diseases was not very well established in Malaysia because everyone is expected to be able to treat infectious diseases. So I set about kind of introducing to the field to colleagues and managing patients, etc. And it kind of coincided with the rapid increase of HIV in the country at the time. And it was clearly obvious that it was especially amongst people who inject drugs, because we didn't have measures such as clean needles and syringes and opioid substitution therapy to mitigate that infection. So to cut a long story short, I kind of managed to get some National Institutes NIH US grant to document this and use that as an advocacy piece to get the government to agree to quickly, implement these measures, because otherwise we were going to have a runaway epidemic. So you can imagine, in a conservative country like ours, that wasn't easy. We had a lot of pushback, the usual criticisms of you're going to increase, you're going to facilitate people who want to use drugs, etc., etc. But lo and behold, we managed to get a pilot project going and showed that it worked. And as you say, the rest is history. It's now financed by Ministry of Health, paid for, the whole program paid for by Ministry of Health. And we've seen a huge decline in the number of new infections annually due to drug use. So and with that, I think because Malaysia is so conservative, still has punitive drug laws, I think the world sort of like went, oh, look what's happening in Malaysia. And I kind of got recognized and asked to help with advocacy in the region as well. And with that, gradually I became involved at the WHO level and International AIDS Society. I've just finished my term as the president of the International AIDS Society, a huge professional organization with about 18,000 members across more than 100 countries. I still remain active with them as immediate past president, but the other 2 hats that I've acquired in the last 1 to 2 years is that of the Global Commissioner for Drug Policy, a very select, if you like, group of mostly former world leaders in politics, in cultural and economics. So, and that's what I'm here in Geneva for the Human Rights Council, to talk about drug policy and human rights. And the other big hat I wear, I guess, is as co-chair of the WHO Science Council, which it's a small group, again, of about 9 of us, 11 of us now, sorry. And we advise Dr. Tedros on specific scientific matters, particularly on new advances in science. So again, I'm doing some work today at the WHO around the mRNA technology. So that's me in a nutshell.
Now, Prof. Adeeba, it's fascinating achievements and fascinating history as well, in terms of how your growth was within Malaysia and then taking it to the international stage. Now, coming from Malaysia, did you find it there was an impediment that you were a woman as you worked within the healthcare system in Malaysia?
Yes, I think because, and let me rephrase that. I think in healthcare in general, that's a no. I don't think, as you know, Brian, Malaysia, when it comes to educating women and especially women in medicine, and also giving equal job opportunities, I think, well, at least I don't think I experienced that kind of gender inequality.
In fact,
because
Prof,
I
actually, to add to what you said, I think many people will be surprised that Malaysia, being a Muslim majority country, there are, even in corporate Malaysia, we do much better than many developed economies, even like Australia. If you do a benchmarking, we are probably we hit higher numbers in terms of women's participation in leadership roles compared to a corporate Australia.
So on that note, perhaps the other hat that I wear is in academia, and I became dean of the Faculty of Medicine at UM for close to 10 years. And again, so I of course, there are certain issues, sort of gender differences, but in terms of resistance to me taking on the role as dean, I was the first female dean, I don't think there was. And there were a number of deputy vice chancellors who were female, and in my team, I didn't select them just because I wanted to address the so-called gender imbalance. I selected my deputy deans based on their merit, right? And it so happened that for most of the time that I was dean, at least 2 or 3 of the deputies are women, or were women. So so yeah, I think I don't experience it in those spheres, in academia and in healthcare. However, in the specific area that I was working on, which is advocacy around drug use, drug policy reform, that I think the gender difference is quite a barrier, because, when you're working with law enforcement, when you're working with prison, when you're working with the drugs agency, they are overwhelmingly male, right? And their experience, the angle they come from in terms of dealing with this incredibly important issue of drug use in the country is very much securitized, whereas I guess I bring my feminine doctor hat and look at it more from public health, human rights, dignity, etc., etc. So there's often this, we're not on the same wavelength at all.
And so, Prof. Adeeba, that's a huge gap then within Malaysia. So in that side of the equation, we really need to put more of a female lens or female participation in the leadership, in the, as you said, the security aspects of it.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think, you know, sometimes I go to meetings and you know, what runs through my head are these, you know, cliches like men are from Mars, women are from Venus, because or you know, like I feel like I've come, you know, I'm giving my age a bit. I feel like Mindy in Mork and Mindy, like we're talking like at a completely different levels, you know. So specifically in that area, yes, I think the gender difference makes a difference, but in academia and in health, I think not really.
Now,
Except, having said that, let me qualify, in health, where it does impede in terms of women participation is moving on from the junior level of medicine to specialists and so forth. And this has got to do, A, with biology, and B, with the government providing support. So in the medical school, you know, more than, or at least 50% of our medical students are women, girls, right? And they do well, they, you know, no issue there. But when they continue on as housemen, medical officers, it also clashes with their biological needs to be a wife, a mother, and so forth. And to specialize in whatever field you want to specialize, more often than not, you continue working and sit exams, et cetera, et cetera. So there's tremendous pressure on both men and women, but in women especially, because, you know, it's the same time that they want to start a family, and same time that sometimes they're expected to look after their aged parents and whatever. So in the absence of a really good childcare and aged care system, this is where I think we are not harnessing the talent, the capabilities, just the mere presence of having women. So many, I mean, you know, the advancement of women in specialties, in specialist medicine, could be much better than what it is right now, I think, if we provide that kind of support.
So I think, yeah, and that's a critical part thing, isn't it? So if you use, and let me go back to global numbers then. WHO says that whilst women are 70% of global health and social welfare, social workforce, in terms of leadership, they only occupy 25% of senior or leadership roles. So I think
so that's also, those numbers are also skewed because the nursing profession is overwhelmingly women
that's
around
right.
the world. But yeah, I mean, you know, in developed countries, you see a lot of female leadership in nursing. I mean, it is true here because that's almost exclusively a female profession. But yeah, I think things can be improved across.
So I think, Prof. Adeeba, you identified two areas that really need to be looked at in order to help women continue to advance in their careers in healthcare. One is, for us, it's either childcare, and the second point then, increased opportunities or help around caregiving of the aged. What sort of programs do we have in Malaysia that perhaps actually currently address this problem in the healthcare sector?
Yeah, in the healthcare sector, I think hospitals try by providing sort of in situ childcare, but it's not enough, and it's very costly. So this really needs to be at the national level program. For both childcare and aged care.
Is the Ministry of Health
to be fair, this is not exclusive to health, right? It's across the board. Women drop out of participation in employment, and from progressing as they, you know, sort of revert to being mothers and, you know, care providers, because for lack of support in that area.
And Prof. Adeeba, you're right. I think from a national perspective, obviously Malaysia is not alone in this, but in terms of female labor force participation, then I suppose this new government needs to look at how, and they have been trying to figure out how to increase labor force participation in general. But obviously, childcare and aged care is something that needs perhaps a more focused lens from the government.
Absolutely.
In order to make sure that we have more female participation in the workforce.
Yeah, absolutely, because it's really, really costly. And I can tell you that from a personal experience, because I have two aged, mother and father who need round-the-clock care at home. And this is often left to individuals and scrambling for assistance. This was raised, I think, in Parliament recently by Member of Parliament from Ipoh Timor, Howard Lee, about the need to have a strategy on aged care, home-based care. And I think, if we, like you say, focus on this is something that's very doable. There needs to be a framework, a training, accreditation of home-based people who would participate in home-based care that would then not only provide employment for Malaysians, but also allow women to return to work.
Now, Prof. Adeeba, I want to zoom in on, because this is a Women in Leadership show in conjunction with World Women's Day, we want to talk about women in leadership and how some of the key traits that actually help women contribute a lot better than, say, particularly in boardrooms, which obviously your husband is head of the stock exchange, is championing.
I don't know how he conducts board meetings. I've never compared myself to him.
One of those key things is, and I'm a believer of that women add diversity to a boardroom. They bring more structure. They bring more meticulousness to boardrooms. But the other thing they also bring, which is from a leadership standpoint that is really good, is empathy as an important leadership skill. Being a leader yourself, how do you see empathy and kindness as a quality that's really needed in leadership now, not only in Malaysia, but globally?
I mean, it comes with my profession as well. So I think it's not just what I think. I think these are also researched. There's lots of people who look at these things and understand the science behind it and do research on it. And I think incredibly important because take for example, in the boardroom, I think women tend to listen first, be more consultative, and also more inclusive. And those traits come from, you have to be empathetic to your fellow board members, to want to listen to what they're thinking, to want to hear about what their thoughts are, rather than the opposite of that, which is the authoritarian. And I think it's important because if you don't listen, if you don't allow others to say what they think, the first time it happens, people, will try and contribute. The second time it happens, people will say, oh, stuff it, I'm not going to give my opinion, if, he or she just only wants to listen to her own voice and take her own opinion and not around the table. So what happens is that people just clam up and, and you're not going to get new ideas and active participation from those around the table.
Now, Prof. Adeeba,
and the second, sorry, so the importance of empathy in leadership is also, so that's in a boardroom scenario, but in the rest of the organization, an empathetic leader generally will get, the support of their, the people they work with, and well-being and being happy at work obviously is important in terms of productivity as well. If people are not happy at work, they're just going to do the bare minimum, right? Whereas if they're happy at work, they will contribute beyond what is asked of them.
Now, Prof. Adeeba, could you perhaps, looking back at your career and leading different organizations, both in Malaysia as well as globally, what are some key leadership lessons that you've learned over the years that you perhaps like to share with the audience?
I think communication is probably number one. A lot of conflict arise from, not communicating adequately, not being honest and truthful, and so, if things bother you and others, I think it's really important to have that open communication channel, because with that, then what you will have is trust. And for any organization, that's super, super important to have trust that goes both ways, right?
Yes.
So communication and trust, and like I said, being consultative and listening to other opinions are things that I think have worked for me as I go through this different leadership. And also to bring others with you, like my junior members in academia and research, whatever. I think giving them the opportunity, the pathway for them to see that, hey, I'm not just working in this organization to benefit the organization, that there is something for me as well. It's important. Everyone wants to advance, right?
Absolutely. And do you think that for women in particular, is there enough mentoring that takes place in the healthcare industry in Malaysia in particular?
This is something we're not very good at, I think. I don't know. Is it because we're all too busy just trying to get through the day-to-day trudge? We need to do better there in terms of mentoring, both in academia as well as in healthcare.
Now, Prof. Adeeba, it's been a great conversation, but before we leave, any final thoughts you'd like to leave the audience with on this very special series in conjunction with World Women's Day?
Yeah, I haven't watched the Netflix documentary. Apparently, it's very good. It's by this guy called Dr. Prof, I think. I don't know if you've heard of it, Brian. It's this life theory called the string of pearls.
Okay.
And it just so resonates with me, because what it says, I think this is how I interpret it, is that, pearls are very imperfect, and sometimes on its own, it can still look beautiful, but when you string the string of pearls with all its imperfections, you have this beautiful, beautiful piece of jewelry, right? And so it kind of says that, whatever your effort is, in other words, don't let perfection be enemy of the good, that you should have to keep stringing these pearls, however imperfect they are. And then at the end, you will have a beautiful piece of jewelry. And I think if we take life's lessons, it's that, every step of the way, you're going to have hurdles, you're going to have imperfections, but you've got to keep moving, because whatever your goal is that's worth achieving, you just have to move forward and accept that there will be imperfections in some of the things that you do. And it totally resonates with me, because some of the things that I have done, whether it's HIV prevention amongst drug users or now drug policy, there are lots of barriers, and we move forward 3 steps and then we find ourselves 2 steps back. But if we keep moving, I think one day we'll get there, inshallah.
Prof. Adeeba, thank you very much for coming on the show.
It's a pleasure.
Now, we've been speaking to Dato Professor Dr. Adeeba Kamaruzaman, the Professor of Medicine and Infectious Diseases at University of Malaya. I'm Brian Fernandez, and we've been watching and listening to Biztech's Women in Leadership show. This interview will be on our website, www.biztech.asia, as well as our social media platforms. It'll also be on our syndication partners' TV stations, radio stations, and websites. Thanks a lot for tuning in.